Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator here. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the Palladium Fantasy role-playing game and how I believe several aspects of Dungeons & Dragons, pretty much since Wizards of the Coast took over, is kind of a response to, if not a low-key rip-off of, innovations that the Palladium game had already achieved. I'm going to list out my top 5 things and an honorable mention, and might bring a few things up as we go along here as I go down the list. But from bottom to top, the first 3 things I'm going to mention are more things that are currently happening in 5e as opposed to things that were built into 5e when it came out. Number 5, Palladium, over 30 years ago, had already decided to drop the whole calling character species races. Right off the bat, yes, in D&D and role-playing games, the original intention is using the term race in the way that the fantasy genre was using the term race, the race of elf, the race of man, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, we do live in a modern time, and modern audiences are going to be exposed to these materials, and not everyone is necessarily going to have that view on how the word race works. Also, the fact that D&D has, elves and orcs capable of interbreeding with humans does lend some validity to the idea that they are actually just different races of a same species. Palladium avoided all of this by just going ahead and calling the different types of creatures species. And this ties into the second thing that I believe is a Palladium innovation that current D&D is trying to adapt, and it's that Palladium doesn't have stock purely evil races. You can play orcs, you can play kobolds, you can play troglodytes, you can play trolls, you can play ogres. Yes, these might generally be villainous peoples, but they are not presented as being universally in such a fashion. And considering how there's current trends in Wizards of the Coast of trying to find new ways of portraying orcs and drow as being a more nuanced peoples, well, Palladium already had done that decades ago. Next up, number 3 on my list is they have a much more nuanced alignment system, whereas D&D's alignments are very coded along an axis of good and evil or chaos and law. Palladium's alignment system, where there is a general good, selfish, evil, general kind of categorization going on, the alignments themselves are not defined by law, chaos, good, evil. You have stuff like principled, unprincipled, scrupulous, anarchist, diabolical, miscreant, and aberrant, which I find when looking, they have nicely developed codes of honor and conduct for each of these, and I generally just find them as slightly more realistic for real-world application than the old D&D alignment system from the 70s. Now, the top 2 on my 5 list here, that Palladium did way long ago, that current 5th edition has been doing since 5th edition came out, is the presence of furry player characters. In modern D&D, the Tabaxi, Leonin, Kenku, Minotaurs, they have playable centaurs, they have a growing array of animal-type characters. Also, you could look at the popularity of D&D open game license spin-offs like Pugmire, or what was they call their cat game? Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, and Palladium already had that with 3 canine races: the Wolfen, the Coils, and the Kenkoran, plus other minor species that are optional for player characters that you can find in the Palladium Bestiary. But the number 1 thing that Palladium had innovated long before the D20 system had adopted is they already had an ascending attack mechanic, wherein your armor rating and or armor class in the D&D version is a number that goes up as the quality of the armor improves, and therefore you have to roll a die 20 and then add applicable bonuses to beat that number. Whereas at the time that this was out, D&D and AD&D were still using THAC0, which is the 2-hit AC 0 dynamic, where you already have it on your character sheet what you need to roll to hit an AC of 0, and then the AC is deducted from that THAC0. So if you're attacking something with an AC of 5, you would subtract 5 from what your THAC0 is, and if your THAC0 is 20, that means you'd have to roll higher than a 15, which, you know, it's not as complicated as people make it out to be, but it is kind of an unnecessary kind of bit of juggling math when you could just have set a high number and just roll over that number and add some bonuses, instead of setting a number, subtracting from that number, and then rolling against that number and then adding some bonuses. It's adding an extra step. And if there's one thing that I would say is just kind of like an honorable mention about things that Dungeons & Dragons kind of ripped off from Palladium, and this gets honorable mention because this isn't less directly relevant to the Palladium fantasy role-playing game, but I can't help but I've always felt that when TSR put out Planescape in the mid-90s, you know, their setting that was all about interdimensional travel through doorways and such, with eclectic combinations of characters available for the players, that I've always felt that that was kind of an answer to the popularity of Rifts at the time. So, anyway, this is just going to be the first part in a small series of videos that I'm going to be putting out, just trying to like rehabilitate the image that Rifts and Palladium games has in some people's minds. Like, Palladium fans really love Palladium, but I just can't help from the notice from the comments I've gotten over the years on YouTube whenever I bring the subject up, that there is a lot of vitriol out there against this game system and its games, and I don't think it's justified. So, yeah, I'll be talking more about that. Well, anyway, be sure to hit like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and I'll see ya when I see ya.